We are in a property boom. What we're going to take you through today makes it undeniable. It's no longer our opinions. We're in a property boom. But it's understanding what's happening, why it's happening, and most importantly, what you should be doing right now. But don't worry, in this pod, we've got all of that covered.
Welcome to the Property Podcast, where every Thursday property investors come to be informed and inspired. This is a must-listen, share with your friends kind of episode. Not because of how great we are, but because of the information that we are sharing. This is an important episode and we're going to be getting into it in just a second. But it doesn't end there, because you want to stick around to the end for Hub Extra, where we're sharing some completely free resources to help you stay safe online.
So lots of exciting things to talk about. But before we get to all that exciting stuff, there's one additional exciting piece of news, which is the magazine, the Property Hub magazine, has gone out and has been delivered right now and is landing on doorsteps across the land. And it's always lovely to see people sending their pics of the magazine on the Instagram and showing us the articles that they are enjoying most. And if you are thinking, well, what's going on? Why am I a part of that? Well, that is because you haven't subscribed. So go and subscribe. It's a £5 for each copy, which is an absolute bargain. You get a copy delivered every couple of months. That's how frequently we publish them now. And they are top notch. And I can say that because I do very little towards it. We've got an amazing team who produce amazing content with some incredible property stories. There's stuff to inspire you. There's stuff to learn from. And of course, Rob and I have our own little articles in there as well. So if you've not subscribed yet, why not top your property knowledge up for a £5 every 2 months? It's an absolute no-brainer. Check out propertyhub.net/magazine.
So this week, we are talking about the fact that we are in a property boom. And to back that up, we've dug out some data that hasn't got a lot of attention at all, surprisingly. So we'll be going through that shortly. And of course, as well as that, we're going to get into the questions that really matter off the back of it. Like, why is it happening? How long will it last? And what can you do to take advantage of it? But before we get into that, we've got a few different news stories that have come out over the last week, all of which getting at this same point in different ways. So let's start with a story from Rightmove using their own data to talk about the towns and cities that have seen the biggest price growth in a year. And topping that list, Rob, somewhere close to home for you, Wallasey in Merseyside, where the annual price change is, wait for it, 15.6%. Bonkers.
It sounds like it should be a typo, doesn't it? 15% in a year. That is huge. But it's not just Wallasey, this one random area that's outperforming the rest of the country. Yes, that is topping the charts, but riding high is Lee in Manchester in second place, and close to Wallasey, Birkenhead in third. So huge growth for these areas and many, many more. There's not just a handful of areas that are experiencing this growth. There's a lot of areas.
Yeah, and the distribution of them is interesting as well. There's loads in the Northwest, which is kind of as you'd expect. If you've been a podcast listener for a while, you'll know why we would have expected that to be the case. There's also some in the Midlands. And then the outlier in the list is Cornwall, Penzance, which kind of makes sense in terms of the whole race for space, as it's being termed, with people wanting to go and have a bit more of a rural life. But also in this Rightmove article, which I think is actually more interesting than the areas themselves, is this little statistic. 23% of properties that come to market are selling within a week, the highest level Rightmove has ever seen. That just goes to show the strength of the market.
It really does. But it doesn't end there, because in an article in the FT over the weekend, there was a report that off-market sales, so the sales of properties that don't even get advertised, was at its highest since 2007. And compared to the first quarter in 2019, the number was 37,000 homes, just over. And when you compare that with the same quarter in 2019, there was 20,800. So a huge percentage uplift from where it was a couple of years ago. Obviously, they've not used last year as a reference point because it was a bit odd last year. But the point is, the number is a record level. And that's because people are talking and they're putting offers in before they even get it to the estate agent. So they're hearing that somebody wants to sell and they're going, put it with the agent. What do you want? I'll buy it. And that happens when the market is hot, when there's a booming market. And those numbers clearly show it. A massive increase in off-market sales. It's actually astonishing there's that many deals done without estate agents, without them even being marketed, just through word of mouth. It's, again, astonishing numbers, Rob.
I was really surprised by those figures. I never would have thought it would be anything like that amount, but it kind of makes sense, I suppose. Or when the market is as strong as it is, why bother giving a percentage to someone else when you're going to have people biting your hand off anyway? And there's more to back up this boom thesis as well. So that's the data, but we've also got an opinion by the CEO of Barclays, who spoke to the BBC the other week and predicted the biggest economic boom since 1948. Well, clearly, he's just been going through his back episodes of the Property Podcast and found us talking about this last year, because we were talking about the possibility of an economic boom when that seemed like a really mad thing to be talking about. But now it's become the mainstream view and everyone's just kind of waiting for it to happen. So he's not specifically talking about the property market there. He's talking about the economy in general. And I think he's onto a fairly safe bet with that claim, Rob, because it would almost seem inconceivable that you could have the property market doing what it's doing and then the rest of the economy not following.
Yeah, absolutely. GDP is expected to be at very strong highs since the 1940s, obviously recovering from the dips that we had last year. And I think it's important that we talk a little bit about why that's happening, and we'll do that later on in the pod. But when we talked about a boom potentially playing out last year, we were in a sticky situation then, and it felt like we were really sticking our necks out to say that, you know what, this is actually probably the scenario that'll play out, the most likely scenario. But like you said, Rob, it's not hard to say, oh, it's going to happen now, and we'll talk about it, but it's really obvious. In fact, I'd be shocked if it doesn't happen. But before we discuss why it's happening, and when I say why, it's not just the property market. There's many markets that are accelerating right now. The stock market, Bitcoin, actually pretty much any asset class you can think of, prices are on the up. But no one's really talking about it. And Bitcoin gets a lot of attention, but nobody's talking about what's happening in property. But we've talked about some astonishing numbers there. But your bread and butter when it comes to property in terms of data is the land registry. And when the land registry data is showing abnormal things, normally the media is all over it. Now, they've understandably been distracted by other things at the moment. But when we talk you through these numbers, it's astonishing that it hasn't received more coverage. Let's go through it, Rob. Do you want to read through some of the numbers? So we've talked about minor regions already and little hotspots, but these are whole regions we're talking about now. So it's the parts of the region that are doing well, not so well, and the overall average. So we're going to give you the numbers in a moment for the whole of Liverpool, the city of Nottingham, Middlesbrough, Sheffield, Leicester, and so on. And we're going to give you the whole area. So we're not going to give you the city. We're not going to give you the suburbs. It's a combination of the both. And, well, Rob, I've teased it enough. Give the people the numbers.
I will. So this is up to the end of February, which is as far as the land registry data goes, because this is based on transactions that have happened. And I'll start with the UK average. The UK average growth over the year to the end of February this year is 6.95%. Now, that number in isolation sounds like a big one. If property prices are growing at 7% a year, that is a heck of a year. That is not your average year. But more notable than that is the fact that 30 regions are outperforming that by quite a distance. So it's not like, oh, 7 is the average and the range is between 6 and 8. The top performers are outperforming it by an absolute mile. So topping the list, you've got Barnsley, which is probably not somewhere that would spring to mind as a property hotspot. But in the last year, prices have grown by 15.81%, which is insane. If you go to second and third on the list, we were in more familiar territory. So Liverpool, this is the whole region of Liverpool, not just the city centre, has done 13.2%. And then third place, the city of Nottingham has done 11.54%. And if you look down the list, you've got the other suspects that you'd expect to have in there. So you've got Sheffield, that's done more than 11%. Leeds, just under 10%. Manchester, just under 9. Derby, which we tipped at the start of this year, 9.5. So not just a few areas, but a huge number of areas that are growing in price by very close to 10% a year, all the way up to, as we've heard, nearly 16. That, Rob, is not normal.
It's not normal. If Liverpool continue to grow at just over 13% each year, then in less than 6 years, property prices would double. Now, I'm not saying that it will grow at that rate for the next 6 years. It might. It's entirely possible. But the fact it's even growing at that rate at all is astonishing. It's up there with the fastest. These areas at the top are taking us back to the 2000s and that bull run in property prices that we had then. Now, Rob's taking you through the areas that are performing best, but the areas that are near the bottom are probably not of surprise to you. The City of London, which is actually quite a small area of London, but an important area because it's the financial district, is only one of two areas that have fallen. But what a fall. 25% fall in the last 12 months, which is astonishing. And then London, inner London, so I probably imagine that's the inside the M25. I don't know for sure, but you can Google it and check for yourself what inner London is classed as, is only growth of 1.5%. And Edinburgh, the city of Edinburgh, only growth of 2%. Your areas that in the earlier part of the cycle that have done very well are not really doing much at all at the moment. And it's really being driven by the hotspots that we've been tipping over the last few years. Now, we don't say that to go, oh, look, we were right again. But it's just to highlight it because people aren't talking about it. And you were almost a weirdo a few years ago to say, like, the North is the place to invest. You know, everyone was like, oh, shut up, Robs. What are you talking about? But it's becoming acceptable now. There was another article in the news over the weekend, again in the FT, which featured that very thing, that investors are moving to the North. Now, this is not a new concept for Property Podcast listeners, but finally, the media is starting to talk about property markets in the North. It's taken double-digit growth for that to happen, but it's happening. But it shows you the lag. It shows you how far behind the media is. They're only now talking about the North as a place to invest. So you know what's going to happen next? The herd will move in. Now, don't worry, you're ahead of the herd, even if you're investing now, because they've got to warm up and it's only going to accelerate and grow and grow and grow. But how long is it going to take for them to talk about a property boom in general? Because let's make no mistake about it, we are absolutely in a property boom right now. The data says it. It's no matter an opinion. It's not an opinion anymore. It's fact. They are boom numbers. So we've said it could happen. Then we expected it to happen, and now it's happened. And while that's very exciting that you know about it before the media have jumped all over it, there's two things that most people listening are going to want to know. Why is it happening? And how long is it going to last?
Okay, let's talk about why it's happening then, because there's a number of different reasons, and understanding the reasons is important because that leads on to trying to understand how long it'll last. For example, one reason for the boom is almost certainly lockdown related. So people have reassessed what they want from their homes and decided that they want to make a move. They're also sick of having spent years not making a move because of general political uncertainty. Therefore, it's all happening. If that was the only reason, then you might think, okay, well, this will peter out in a quarter or two and then we'll be back to normal. But I think that's just one of the reasons. Another reason is government support for the housing market. So the stamp duty holiday, for example. Again, if that was the only factor, once the deadline passed, you'd expect everything to drop off again. But that is not the only factor. It is a factor though, and the government is doing more things to prop up the housing market as well, such as 95% mortgages. It's probably worth noting though that we haven't even started to see the impact of 95% mortgages in these figures because the products have only started coming out over the last few weeks. So you might be picking up more interest in things like the Rightmove data, but that'll be nowhere near hitting the land registry data, which is where we're looking at transactions that have already completed. And we're already seeing loads of regions with price growth over 10% a year. And then there's another reason why this is happening, which is probably the more relevant one for our purposes because it's the one that has the potential to go on for longer and have further reaching effects. And that is government stimulus. Now, back in episode 414, we did an episode about QE and how it had the potential to dramatically affect property prices. Well, it seems like that might actually be happening or starting to happen. So if you haven't listened to that episode yet, go do it. As soon as you finish this one, go get episode 414 because it will take this seemingly shocking set of numbers and make it actually make a lot of sense. But Rob, not to put you on the spot, but I wonder if you could give the 30-second summary of how this stimulus is affecting property prices.
Yeah, so we are creating money, in effect. It's not printed, it's virtual. And that's what QE is. It's the creation of new money that didn't exist previously. And that money is used in different ways, but ultimately it drives asset prices up. We explain in detail how that works in that episode, but that's what plays out. Now, we have had record levels of QE, and that's not just in the UK, that's across the world. So that will translate to record levels of certain assets because there's more cash, so people need to put it into assets. They don't want to put it into savings because you don't get anything if you save. There's no return. So people want assets. Now, property is a major asset. It's trusted by the millions and billions around the world. People understand property, but also stocks and shares is kind of stable stuff that people understand. But it's not just the bread and butter stuff that's going up. You've got Bitcoin and then all the other altcoins and options that are out there as well. And then you're getting some even more fringe stuff that's accelerating in price right now. And this is happening across the world. As I've said, it's not just a UK thing. Here's an interesting story to give you an idea of how the increase of money supply impacts on assets. The highest performing stock market last year was not the US. The US was one of them, but it wasn't the highest. The highest was Zimbabwe. The top 10 index was actually its poorest performer because it only grew by 724% last year. And I'm not making this up. The middle cap index market grew by, wait for it, 1,808%. Or to be exact, 1,808.02%. That sounds like crazy talk. And it is crazy because Zimbabwe and how they treat money is crazy. So a quick recap of how that's played out. So Zimbabwe has had issues with their currency in the past. They printed too much, and then people lost faith in the currency, and the markets crashed. So a few years back, they decided to stabilize things, have a robust monetary policy, which meant that the money wasn't to be printed at reckless rates, and they started to recover. A few years ago, they had a bit of an economic wobble, so they started to print money again. But then COVID came around, and they thought, oh, what can we do? I know, we started printing money a couple of years ago, so they printed more. But over 80% of the currency in supply now has been created in the last 12 months. They've printed that much, which has meant that everyone's gone, well, what are we going to do with all this cash? I know, let's buy assets. So Zimbabwe is a very extreme example of how assets are inflated by an increased money supply. And it's an insane amount of money supply that has been created. But it helps you understand how this plays out and plays out in the real world because you can see those numbers for yourself. Go search for them. But even better, go to our show notes and I'll link to a YouTube video, which is very easy to understand, which talks about the Zimbabwe market boom and the reasons for it. So you've got growth happening all over the world. It's just begun. This is the start. And there are many reasons, but stimulus being the main one, for this to happen. But it can't happen forever. Now, what will happen is the media will jump on this soon. And soon could be later this year or next year. I don't think it'll take the year after. I'm pretty sure by next year they'll start to cotton on to what's happening and give it attention. And then the masses will start to push this market up further. Prediction time, I don't think these numbers will be the highest in this market cycle. I think in some years will be reported numbers higher than these. I really do, because the masses haven't moved to property yet. But we know that this can't last forever, Rob. But luckily, podcast listeners will also know about the 18-year property cycle, which gives us an indication of how long this should last.
Yes, if you're not familiar with the 18-year property cycle, then go to the Property Hub website, search for property cycle. You'll find all kinds of resources, including a course that we've done on this subject. But the most recent podcast episode that we did, it was back in February, episode 415. We had an episode called Where Are We in the 18-Year Property Cycle? And in that episode, we laid out where we are in the property cycle and noted that at the moment, where we are in terms of what we're seeing in the world, spookily exactly matches what the property cycle says should be happening. It's actually a bit too on the nose to be comfortable. If it was there or thereabouts, you go, okay, great, the model's working, but it's almost exact and it's a bit scary. So if that continues to play out, Then we've got until 2026. We've got another 5 years of the property market booming before it comes to a sudden lurching halt and we have a crash. Now, of course, whenever we talk about the property cycle, we're at pains to say this is an average. You wouldn't expect this to work out exactly. It just so happens that this time round, so far, it has played out exactly. But that doesn't mean that it will do for the rest of the cycle. So you can't say for sure that it's going to be another 5 years of boom. But when you put that together with the reasons that we've just talked about and looking back at what happened last time, like Rob talked about, with it starting to happen, then the masses getting involved and then everything getting a bit overheated and all the rest of it, then it would lead you towards the view that you're looking at somewhere like roughly that amount of time. That's interesting because at the moment, the prevailing view when you look at property still seems to be, oh, well, it's just a temporary thing. It's all going to peter out by the end of the year. When you see most commentary around property, even the kind of people who normally would be talking up the market are not. So whenever the nationwide price index comes out and shows that prices are absolutely rocketing, the commentary around it from nationwide is always, oh, well, yeah, we're seeing this, but stamp duty, but this, but that. We don't expect this to last. Maybe that's the case, and maybe we're going to look really stupid this time next year. But I really believe that people who have that kind of view are looking at the wrong thing. They're looking very close up at the property part of it. They're missing the context about stimulus and everything else, and they're missing the psychology factor as well. When you go into a boom, and especially when you get into the later stages of a boom, you don't get that boom because everyone's come to a well-reasoned opinion about what stimulus is likely to do to the markets and blah, blah, blah. No, you get a boom because prices are going up and everyone wants a piece of it. And that self-perpetuates it. Once it starts going, it doesn't just peter out again. It only stops when something suddenly changes and you get this immediate crash. The crash is sudden. It doesn't just drift back down again. So I think, Rob, this is all a very long way of saying no one knows how long it'll last. But if you listen to most commentary at the moment, it seems to be like, well, it'll be done before the end of the year. But in our opinion, guided by the 18-year cycle and other things, we think there are a good few years to go. And if you are a strict adherent of the property cycle, then the answer is 5 years.
Yeah, and where we differ to the commentators out there as well is they are saying that it won't last long and then it'll peter out. There won't be a crash. We're saying that we expect this to boom for a number of years and then there'll be a market crash. So again, what happens next, we have a very different opinion on as well. So let's just say for a moment you buy in, or at least are open-minded to our view of the world. What should you do? Well, the question we get pretty much every week, and sometimes it feels like multiple times a week, is should I just wait for the crash? That is probably the worst thing you could do right now. Of all your options, that'll be the worst. Because just sitting and waiting, you're going to watch property go up and up and up. We are not in the winner's curse. The winner's curse is the last 2 years of the cycle. And if you buy at that point, then you'll be worse off after the crash than before. But you are going to have, if you follow the 18-year property cycle, multiple years of growth. So if you buy today, then you will see large increases in your value of your property that even after the crash, it'll still be higher than what you purchased it at today. So what should you do? Well, enjoy your knowledge. I'm personally not a fan of boom and bust cycles. I think they're unfair. I think, unfortunately, it's only the financially educated who get to benefit from this, and we're doing our part to try and make as many people educated around this subject as possible. Unfortunately, and this is the masses, those who don't understand how market cycles work, and that also applies to most commentators out there as well, get hurt. And some people get really burnt because they get in right at the end of these bull runs. I've seen it with many other asset classes that have been through bull runs in the past as well. Unfortunately, it's the normal general public who, possibly the ones who don't have as much money to actually begin with, are the ones who get excited near the end of a cycle and get burnt. Now, you shouldn't feel guilty about your knowledge. It may not be right, but you can decide what to do now. You can decide to benefit from what plays out or be punished by it. And obviously, you want to choose benefit. Take advantage of your knowledge. Make moves. Enjoy it. You've waited a long time for a property boom. No one's even talking about a property boom yet. So you've got a few years before everybody cottons on to what's happening. But enjoy it. This only comes around once every 18 years. You get this 5-year run of property prices doing very, very well. Embrace it. Take advantage of it. And then you can decide what you want to do in 5 years' time. But for now, That's a long time away, and you can make massive gains and benefit massively from what's happening in the market. And if you want to help others, let them know about the podcast. Let them know what's happening so they can take advantage of it as well. And the more people that understand, the better, because then the normal people, which we're very normal, could not just watch certain people get wealthy through these cycles because they understand what's happening. We all understand. And that's a powerful place to be in, because in previous market cycles, things like podcasts haven't existed. There was a vacuum of information. So therefore, it was very few people got to benefit from what played out. But now we can all benefit. And I think that is a powerful thing and something that we should embrace. So while you may not be a fan of boom and bust cycles like myself, or maybe you are, it doesn't matter. Either way, you know what to do now, which is take advantage of it and share the pod.
There will be lots of success stories created as we move into this next stage of the market. But there is plenty of success stories already happening in the Property Hub community, and we'd love to hear about them. So please, we're on all the socials. We're at Property Hub UK. We're easy to find. Let us know how you're getting on. Just like Paul did on Instagram the other day, who said, "Hi Rob and Rob, my wife Hannah and I bought our first investment property in February 2019. So where are we? Just over 2 and a bit years ago. And we now have 10 plus buy-to-lets at our hometown of Burnley." I love how he's put 10 plus, like he's lost count. There are so many. It's amazing. "I left my job last week after 15 years employed to move full-time to our property business, and we couldn't be more excited about the future with a number of great projects already lined up for 2021. Well, that is incredible. That is not a normal result. Most people are not going to accumulate 10 plus buy-to-lets in the space of 2 years. You don't have to go that big to consider yourself a success and share your story with us, but it's still inspiring to hear about things like that happening. So well done to you, Paul.
So just when you think all the value is eking away from the podcast, boom, we're back with Hub Extra. So Hub Extra now, the part of the show where we give you a bit more. And remember, that's backed up by our newsletter that goes out every Friday, which we aim to make the most valuable email you receive in your inbox each week. Sign up to the Property Hub website if you haven't already, and you will get that email each and every Friday. But let's give you something a bit extra here. And this week, it's all about protecting your online security. There's always scare stories of stuff that's going on online, people's data being stolen, people being hacked. It's a bit of a scary place out there if you start to deep dive into what happens. But you can protect yourself. There's loads of things you can do. We've talked about getting yourself a VPN previously, and that's well worth looking into if you haven't got that set up already. But another way, and you can do this for free, to really up your security is to get an authenticator app installed. Rob, do you want to give a quick overview of how this works?
Yeah, it's like an extra layer of security. So sometimes it's called two-factor authentication. So one factor is your password, and the other is having access to a device that's got this app on it. So you'll have come across this before when you get, like, your bank will send you a text before you can log in. So you put in your password, then they send you a text. That's the same thing. But using an authenticator app is actually better than getting a text, because it's actually possible for someone to call up like the mobile network, impersonate you, get your number ported to them, and then they're getting your texts. But it's also more convenient because it means you can do it on multiple devices. And if you're not in range of where you can receive text messages, it all still works. So rather than getting sent a text, you just open up this app and you put in a code and then you're in. There are various different apps that do this. So Google has got an authenticator, so has Microsoft. LastPass, which I think we talked about on the podcast, has got one as well. And then there's Authy, A-U-T-H-Y, which is the one that I use. But they're all pretty similar. It doesn't really matter which one you use. Just search for two-factor authenticator and various different options will come up. Then get it set up for any website where it would cause you serious trouble if someone else got in. So anything financial is a good place to start. Put it on your email as well, definitely, because if someone gets into your email, then they can go and get all the password resets that get sent to that email. And then you can move on from there if you want to. It does make it a little bit less convenient because it's not as simple as just entering your password. There's this other job to do as well, but it's so worth it for the boost that you get in terms of security. This is something that we've implemented across Property Hub recently. So now to log into our systems, you need to be using an authenticator as well as using a password, because we know that there are so many attacks out there and we're regularly getting nefarious people trying to get into our systems. Not just us, it's every business out there. So it's well worth just spending half an hour getting this set up and then sitting back with that extra peace of mind knowing that you're safe.
So that's us done for another week. Thank you for listening. And we don't often ask for this, but can you share? I think you should share episode 414 and 415. You should go back and re-listen to them, actually, because it'll really enforce the message that we passed on today. But also share this episode with your friends, family, work colleagues who have a passing interest in property, because they're probably going to get caught up in property excitement at some point. But the sooner they get caught up in the property excitement, the better, because the media will jump on this soon, and then more and more people will pile in. But if you can get in now, well, the more the upside. So please do share the podcast with others. Re-listen to those episodes and use the knowledge that you have to take action and better your financial situation. Thanks for listening, everyone. We'll be back on Tuesday with Ask Rob and Rob, and of course, the Property Podcast on Thursday. Till then, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.